Yeah, so Matt Ehret, he's brought out his part 7, I think, of the Tesla series. I think I'm probably going to wait until part 8 is out because it seems like I'm not quite sure where it is he's going with this one. So I think I'll wait till part 8 comes out before I dive in on that one. But while we wait, let's carry on looking at Leibniz. I've got some notes here. Let me try to gather my thoughts. Right, so we've got some basics from the previous one. Leibniz denies intersubstantial causality, but he affirms intra-substantial causality. So there's no causality between monads, but there is inner causality within a monad, although that inner causality is a chain that stretches back with its origins in God's initiating that chain. And so the chain of causality is literally like a stack of dominoes. Just God pushed the first one, and then afterwards the whole pattern, as it's been arranged in advance, all occurs. You see these things on YouTube with these amazing, they've got a lot of patience, these people, but anyway, they arrange all these dominoes out in a great big scenario, and they push one and the whole thing just takes place. Some people have actually even done models of computing gates, of logic gates out of dominoes, which is quite interesting. Anyway, so you've got this intrasubstantial causality, which is the unfolding of the kind of the allotted program, if you like, of any given monad that God then initiates with the first little shove, and then barring sort of miracles where he might have to intervene because a domino doesn't quite fall over because of whatever, he has to maybe poke it again to get the thing moving again, I don't know, but barring that kind of thing, the whole thing is just set in motion at the beginning and just unfolds forever after. But everything, so mind, body, they're both two parallel chains of causation that might appear to have some crosswise relations, but their only origin is with God. Very similar to Spinoza and his idea of things. The main exception with Leibniz is that in order to preserve the idea of free will, Spinoza, I think, does have an idea of allowance for freedom, but I haven't gone into that really, so I can't really comment on that. But Spinoza wanted to preserve the idea of free will, and so Spinoza rejects the idea that all that is possible is actual. So did I say Spinoza? Leibniz rejects Spinoza's idea that all that is possible is actual. So for Leibniz, although our actualized world is certain, there are other possible worlds where things could have been different. So it doesn't involve a contradiction to say that things could have been different had God chosen another scenario. So, yeah, for Leibniz, that means that on a kind of metaphysical level, between possible worlds, It could have been that, you know, Zelensky wasn't president of Ukraine right now, and hadn't chosen to be that. So what's ruled out here is both mind-body interaction, but also mind-mind interaction. So there's no more interaction between minds or monads than there is between mind and body here. It's just a straightforward kind of parallel destiny, if you like, that unfolds, that God has arranged to be the best possible world. So he explains the appearance of causality by saying that when one thing appears to cause another, it's due to this unfolding pattern. If we bring back our idea of the musical score, this unfolding pattern that occurs brings forwards one monad into prominence, and another one is kind of pushed into the background, so to speak. And so since the aim, the purpose of the monads, their final cause is to attain the greatest possible existence, the coming forwards of one monad into prominence, maybe it's their turn to play their instrument in the score, brings them into the role of active, and others recede into the role of passive, and this is what we perceive to be cause and effect. So yeah, he's got this idea of efficient cause as primarily governing the realm of bodies, and the idea of final cause primarily covering the realm of souls. But given that every monad is, in a certain very limited sense, a kind of soul, because they all have perceptions, and these perceptions are interlinked with the entirety of the universe, and monads have only insubstantial they're created substances, but they don't have physical substance as such. They don't have physical existence. The idea of the physical world is a reflection of their relations, and so in a sense, in that sense, given that they are all playing their part in God's grand symphony that we're all kind of playing, the monads that are kind of more limited, and which we might think of as being just related to physical stuff alone, there is no such thing as a monad that has no perceptions, and so they are all alive to the symphony of the universe, even though in a very, very limited way. So in that sense, they are all alive to the final cause of the universe, which is something that pertains more to those monads that have that are the kind of reflection of, or that reflect the existence of more of monads that have a greater part to play in the symphony. And the monads that have the greatest part of the symphony would be the monads with rational souls, and then you have a hierarchy going down through the animal all the way down to inorganic matter, but all of it has a perception, in a sense, of the overall thing. And so we've got this, although, so the even the division between efficient and final cause with Leibniz is like it's like a sliding scale, if you like. So there's nothing that is wholly without efficient cause, and there's nothing that is wholly without final cause. It's just that with the monads that are governed by reason, or not governed, but the monads that are associated, let's call, with reason, with rational minds, they're governed far more by the final cause than lesser monads, in this kind of hierarchy of strata that go all the way down through everything to infinity. So trying to remember where I was going with this. Yeah, so every monad has as its sort of final cause the desire to maximize its existence, which obviously brings it closer to the perfect existence of God. And so as part of this, the monads with the greatest existence are therefore the monads that we might appear from our point of view to be those that are actually controlling the other monads. But since there's no inter-monad causality of any kind, even according to any kind of final cause, everything goes back to God in that sense. But they can appear to be more dominant. But nonetheless, you can still say that since we can, for the purposes of a clear understanding of things, think of there being only a select few monads with souls, as opposed to those that do have souls, but they're so confined in their role. You know, you've got like maybe, I don't know, like something that exists at the Planck length or the Planck scale. Although monads don't have scale, but that monad pertains to something that we have in our physical world as something on the Planck scale, is still infinitely interconnected, totally interconnected with all other monads. But you can imagine something on that scale is going to have a very limited sense of its world, whereas something that exists on a grander scale, such as the human soul, can have a far greater sense of where it is in relation to everything else, you know. So in following our musical analogy, you've got, you know, a composer can have a sense of the overall score, whereas someone that's just playing the triangle might be, you know, sitting through the whole symphony worried about their mortgage, you know, and then only when it comes around to the actual bit that they've got to play, they bang the triangle and sort of come out of their stupor, only to sink back into it afterwards and drift off again into their day-to-day worries, you know. So it's a bit like that. So you've got this sort of sense of coming forwards, sinking back, but certain monads have a far greater and more dominant sort of part to play. But equally, no monad is completely attached to its material that it's part of. because of the constant flux and change within nature. That means that one minute it's associated with some monads, another time it's associated with others, that this constant ebbing and flowing of everything interweaving that is the kind of unfolding of this grand sort of symphony that's playing. So according to Leibniz's thought, I mean, in section 50 he says that something along the lines that maximised activity is equivalent to more perfection, and that explains the less perfect, which is the more passive. And to quote him, and it is on this account that the former is said to act on the latter. But he's not saying that there is actually causation here. Causation is, it's not a real thing in the sense that substances are real things, or God is a real thing. So each monad represents the whole universe, and because there's like an infinity of monads, there's no limit to this, to the degrees of being that there are, and so there's no limit to these perspectives that each has on the universe. It's not like Leibniz is ever going to reach kind of peak monad and have to institute some kind of, Malthusian scheme to sort of limit himself to a monad after to maybe, do double duty for two different things. They can. There's just an infinity of them. So there can be a monad for every single radii of every single circle in the whole universe. It doesn't. There's nothing is the self similar in that sense. There is maximum diversity. In the same way, going back to our musical analogy, that a C sharp in one symphony is, in a certain sense, unique. There's the same C, or we might call the same C, isn't really the same C sharp in a different symphony, because its role in relation to all the other notes is completely different. So it's kind of almost close to Heraclitus and the idea of flux, and he wasn't a fluxist, by the way. But anyway, it comes kind of close to that idea in a way, because of this ebbing and flowing of everything, one into everything else. There's also no real birth and death, because he describes it as a sort of relative affair of envelopments and diminutions. But equally, there are no souls without bodies. There are no unembodied spirits. Only God is an unembodied spirit. So, in that sense, all created monads are bound to unfold the plan in and through nature. So, because in some senses, what Leibniz is saying sounds a little bit like Berkeley, if he's denying the existence of the real existence of space, time, causality, and matter. But Leibniz is kind of really wants to preserve both the idea of the mechanistic sciences as well as the idea of the human soul, free will, and God. And so it can't be that nature is some kind of just mere epiphenomenon, being part of nature, even in as a kind of form or entelechy of nature, must be important. It must have significance for the unfolding of the monads' inner purpose, according to the God's final end, his final cause. So it's not an option for a monad to kind of just skip over all the tricky details of nature and just cut straight to the chase, just unify itself, find its way directly back to God. It's got to find its way through the maze of natural appearances in order to realise the whole point of what God has put into play by writing this symphony. So although a soul follows its own laws, which are driven by its sense of the final cause, and the body follows its own laws according to those, the laws of motion and physical laws. And although these two things are completely without any interaction within the whole thing, we need to just bear in mind that he's talking about soul in two different senses here. So there is the sense in which even things that are just following, even entelechies, or the form of the smallest thing that we can imagine, is it still has a soul, even down at that level, but it's just so limited that we may as well, for the sake of talking about things coherently, imagine that it doesn't for a minute and just think of human beings as having souls, or animals as having souls, and so in that sense there's this, like I say, there's this relationship of causes which is a kind of interplay of the two things. So yeah, I hope that's clear. I think I'm kind of getting clearer on it, but there's one really, really important thing that I came across when I was kind of really trying to go through all this, and that is that Leibniz talks again about automata and the universe as a kind of divine machine. And bearing in mind that everything that we think of down to the smallest thing would have this element of soul to it. Everything has form to it for him. So he does make a distinction, a very interesting distinction, between the machines that God has made and the machines that man can make. And here it's in, let's see, point 64 in the Monadology. So he talks of the divine automaton or machine being the equivalent of an organic body of living things, and that a machine made by man is not a machine to the fullest extent. It's the distinction between man-made machines or automata and divine machines is that man-made machines have parts that are not themselves machines, whereas the divine machine has machines within every part ad infinitum, to infinity. So whereas you can break a man-made machine ultimately down into bits and pieces, every part of every divine machine is itself made of other machines. And there's no kind of point at which you ever end up with a simple nut or bolt. You know, there's, or cog as he calls it, he refers to a cog. And so his idea of the divine automata is that the infinite richness and diversity guarantees that there's no. It's the idea of things being automata, being machines, as far as Leibnitz's idea of the monadology and the role that even these tiny little souls have to do with everything. That there is no dead, fallow, or sterile thing in the entire universe. So it's actually the idea of the machine that guarantees the richness and aliveness of everything in this totally interconnected universe of just mind-boggling Baroque complexity that Leibniz conceives of. And I think that's definitely worth bearing in mind in relation to what Matt Ehret is talking about in relation to Tesla and the idea of robotics and that kind of thing. I think that we've, there's I'm not, like I said before, I'm not sure this excludes that gets Tesla off the hook here. Maybe he did mean he was just like this dead thing. Maybe he meant that robots were like dead things. Or maybe Tesla was talking, when he's talking about evolving robots, maybe what he's got in mind is the idea that you whilst never being able to compete with the divine robot, you can nonetheless create robots that have, or automata that have increasingly more and more moving parts, that each of which has their own purpose, each of which has their own form. And in theory, there's no limit to how far down that infinite road you could go, but you're never going to get to infinity with it. And so we could carry on creating the most complex kind of man-made parallels to the natural mechanism. But because we're not starting at the starting point, which is God, we're starting from the finite point of humanity, our infinity will always be a kind of bad infinity. It will always be a kind of an infinity that is constantly kind of chasing its own tail in ever bigger or smaller circles, whichever way you want to go. And whereas God's infinity is the whole, So God is is the circle, and we are the radii trying to approximate the circle. But it doesn't matter how many radii we introduce, we can't even get from one radii to the next, let alone to the whole circle. So our infinity is a bad infinity. God's infinity is a divine infinity, which is outside of that finite, attempt to draw a circle just using one radii after another, So, yeah, I think that's kind of well worth bearing in mind in relation to this discussion of robotics, etc. with Leibniz. I don't think Leibniz would have said that you can't evolve a robot that could say a robot that can build a robot that can build a robot that can build a robot, and on and on and on. You could have a universal machine. You could develop a universal machine that could make anything else, and it could just churn out all this other stuff, but it would never be a perfect automata in the sense that Leibniz means, because it would always be a bad infinity in that sense. That's basically it.